The following is an extremely condensed and meme-ified version of the actual story. The end of World War II saw the Soviet Union getting swole on the steroids of victory from the massive recovery it made after Germany broke the non-aggression pact it made between the two nations. The Allied powers, specifically the US, were hoping that taking on the Soviets as one of their war besties would ease some of the recent tension they had been feeling with each other. Unfortunately, the Cold War had other plans for them. The Cold War is a long and complicated topic. There are spies and space races and military races and nuclear races and Iron Curtains and the Korean War, and there was a lot, guys. There was a lot to the Cold War.
When there's too much drama at school, all you gotta do is walk up.
The main thing is that the US was scared of communism. People today are still scared of it. Point being, imagine that the US hears the news that Cuba, another nation they have rocky relations with, has had an uprising in their dictatorship. Initially, reviews were positive on the tomato meter, but then the US found out that said overthrowers Fidel Castro and Che Guevara wanted to implement a communist government. What's even worse, these two countries started to become friends. The US is like really jealous because they thought they had some special unmatched tension with Russia, and now stupid Cuba is forming alliances willy-nilly, that whore. They went so far as to downright tell Cuba to stop being friends with Russia. So the US, rage-stricken, decides to invade Cuba and overthrow Castro. It does not go well. At all. There's a lot of things that went wrong with it, but I'm not really inclined to bother with that right now. Point being, a lot of people died and a lot were taken prisoner. The US was publicly humiliated, like you can't sit with us humiliated. It ruined what little there was left of US-Cuban relations. It also strengthened Soviet-Cuban relations due to the Soviets providing Cuba with high-quality weapons and offering them protection. So now it's 1962. It's been a rough few years for the US. Did I mention that Kennedy has also just begun the escalation in Vietnam right now? Oh my god, I could never be president. That would be too stressful. But, so, Cuba and the Soviet Union are now besties, and the Soviets are like,
"Hey, Patrick. What? I thought of something funnier than
forming a communist alliance in the midst of the Cold War against the United States.
Let me hear it.
Putting my nuclear missiles on your land, creating the possibility of a nuclear war between the two greatest military powers on Earth."
So, the Soviet Union put some of their missiles in Cuba, but the US used its Spidey sense and also some U-2 surveillance planes to detect the missile locations in Cuba. The president was officially notified of this on October 16, 1962. As you would expect, this caused massive hysteria. The nuclear race was a big part of the Cold War, and now both nations had nuclear weapons within a launchable distance of each other, leading to a possible nuclear war. The US's first immediate unanimous solution from the Joint Chiefs of Staff was another invasion of Cuba.
Let me... Oh my god!
Try again.
It's a good thing John F. Kennedy was there to talk them out of it. He was determined to make sure the US didn't start any more conflicts before Vietnam and Berlin, the other two ongoing crises, were also resolved. Instead of an invasion, they decided to go with a blockade, or rather a quarantine, which was the term they had to use so they didn't start a war. This quarantine prevented any more offensive military equipment from entering Cuba. But, in the same way that beauty gurus can't keep their noses out of each other's business, other countries were now getting involved in the mix. China, funnily enough also a communist nation, made very vocal that they were rooting for Cuba. West Germany was cheering on the US due to their participation in events ongoing in the area. For a minute, France refused to believe it at all. Oh France, how we love you. Turkey was extremely unhappy with the deal being made under the table to remove all of the US's missiles from their country, but I'm getting ahead of myself on that one. By this point, the US was at DEFCON 2. That's the bad one, not the good one. The crisis had been going on for 11 days now, and Kennedy, letting the stress get to him, was finally like, you know what, we should probably invade Cuba. The Soviets are probably not going to back down, so why should we? But then, sent from the heavens, comes Alexander Alexander Feklisov. This thick boy was a KGB resident spy and used his status to convince his American contacts to talk to their State Department contacts and suggest a diplomatic deal. The deal was that the Soviet Union would remove their missiles and in return the US wouldn't invade Cuba. Not that Che was worried or anything. While all this was happening, Turkey, I see you. Hold on. Meanwhile, it was October 27th, day 12 of the Cuban Missile Crisis, and Fidel Castro was on edge about the pending Cuban invasion, so he ordered that all U.S. aircrafts near Cuba be shot down, because that definitely won't start a Cuban invasion. He also sent a letter to Khrushchev, then leader of the Soviet Union, encouraging nuclear escalation, because that definitely wouldn't start a Cuban invasion. Of course, wouldn't you know it, a surveillance U-2 aircraft was shot down, killing the American pilot inside of it, right in the middle of American-Soviet negotiations. Things got hella tense. Both sides had plans to escalate the conflict. Of course, Cuba didn't want an invasion. The US and the Soviet Union, with the help of Robert F. Kennedy, were making their final negotiations, and it is at this point Turkey takes a big L for the whole team. Sorry, Turkey. In addition to the previously agreed upon proposal, the US will secretly remove their missiles from Turkey. They're also taking them from Italy, but Turkey takes it a lot harder. That same day, in the final of a string of bad decisions made by the US, the Navy dropped a depth charge that was, unbeknownst to them, armed with a nuclear torpedo. The nearby Soviet submarines were ready to fire their nuclear torpedoes until Vasily Arkhipov was like, maybe not. That could be bad. This day came to be known as Black Saturday. By October 28th, the previously discussed agreement had been approved and the missiles were removed from Cuba, Italy, and Turkey. But things weren't fine and dandy, oh no. Things were plenty tense. Turkey was mad at the US for removing the missiles. Cuba was mad at the US for ruining their friendship with the Soviets. The Soviets were mad at Cuba for violating direct orders from Moscow and shooting down US aircraft using Soviet missiles. Cuba was mad at the Soviet Union for essentially betraying them by not starting a nuclear war, and of course, the Soviet Union and the US would stay mad at each other for many years to come over the Cold War. And what did we learn? I don't know. Probably something about communism.